Hey family, I'm Sam Petty. I want to take some time and say thank you for listening to the One Identity Movement podcast. You know, God is a good father, and he's not the reflection of your earthly father. He is the divine perfection of your earthly father, and he loves you so much. Oh my goodness, he loves you so much. I wanted to take some time and invite you into today's podcast. We're going to be continuing a series on the Father's heart. This is a teaching insert from a series I did a while back called Abba's Heart. And today's lesson is going to be getting off center of the Father's love. What happens when we fall into a cycle of shame? Yeah, a lot of people experience it, but a lot of people don't want to talk about it. What happens when we get off center of the Father's love? Before I forget, if you want more information about One Identity Movement and God as your perfect Father, go ahead and visit our website, www.oneidentitymovement.com, or you can find us on social media. All right, let's jump right in.
So then how do we get off center from the Father's love? How do we drift from it? How did the prodigal son, the rebellious son, how did he do this? Let's ask this and really begin to unpack this. And then how do we, as believers, let's bring it into our context, how do we get off center of the Father's love? First, I want to define what the Father's love is, in case you want to take a picture or write notes. Father God's love is a place of security, comfort, provision, rest, acceptance, belonging, inheritance, and identity. Simple definition, the Father's love is home. However, when we choose not to listen to all the things that the Father says to us and not to receive provision and rest and affirmation and acceptance, and when we choose to listen to the father of lies, according to John 8:44, we will begin to live and get off center from the Father's love. I want to kill this rabbit. Hear me as I say this. Be very careful whose voice you have in your ear, because what you hear will determine what you do. I'm going to say it again. Be very careful whose voice you have in your ear, because what you hear will determine what you do. Hebrews 13:5. Don't love money. Be satisfied with what you have, for God has said, I will never leave you and I will never abandon you. Luke 15:31, the father said to him, this is to the older son, he said, look, dear son, you have always stayed by me, and everything I have is yours. Abba's heart and the message of God his Father lets us know that the Father never leaves us. However, we have the ability to get off center from his love. He never leaves us in his authority. He never leaves us. His heart is always there for us. But sometimes we get off center from his love. And as soon as we begin to drift and move from the Father's love, the father of lies begin to initiate certain voices in our ears, which always dictates our thoughts and our words and our actions. One of the first things that actually causes us to get off center of the Father's love is valuing God more for what he can do for us than we value him for love and intimacy with his heart. That's what the younger son did. He wanted his inheritance right away before the appropriate time. He already had the posture of an orphan and the heart posture of being a prodigal nature or rebellious even before he left his father's house. Immaturity of the soul, a prodigal nature, happens when we get off center of the Father's love and we only think about our own desires and not the desires of other people. When we first come to the Lord, it's about, Lord, change me. Lord, save me. That's what salvation is. I am a sinner in need of your grace. Therefore, I choose to make you not only Savior, but also Lord of my life. But as we grow and mature in God, we should begin to understand the Father's love meets the needs that I have. Therefore, I can begin to give the love that I've received away. But the immaturity of the soul says, let me focus on my desires. Let me focus on my needs instead of the needs of other people. When we live off center of the Father's love, we consume the blessings of God based on our own lusts, which means we value God more for what he can do. I'm going to keep hitting it. We value God more for what he can do for us than intimacy and transparency with his heart. The message of God is Father, Abba's heart, calls us to continually live centered in the Father's love. What does that look like? It looks like the mission of God in the earth. I've said it all 3 lessons. What is the Father's mission for us? To receive his love and give it away. We get off center when we refuse to receive it and give it away, when we either hoard it for ourselves or even we then refuse to receive it. If our focus is not on receiving the love of the Father, if our focus is not on being centered in his love, we will begin to drift from his heart. Our value systems will begin to change. The renewal of the Father's presence will begin to cease, and intimacy with his heart will begin to dry up. In other words, we won't feel the Father's tangible affection around us anymore. And just as the younger son did in this story, we will end up spending the fullness of our inheritance on things that do not matter and on things that don't have any true value. And we'll find ourselves in a dry and a needy place. Lesson 1, I shared that as human beings, we have needs, all right? Love, intimacy and transparency with other people, acceptance and approval. However, when those needs go unmet, it does one thing. It makes our heart sick. Proverbs 13:12, hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a dream fulfilled is a tree of life. We broke that down, what that word hope means, and then what that word dream means. It means a vital source in our lives. The idea is blood that flows through our veins. So then, when the need of our heart, which is the Father's love, is not met, it makes our heart sick. And these unmet needs have the ability to affect every part of our lives and every relationship of our lives. It just doesn't affect you. Family, job, friendships. Continual unmet needs cause us to move into a spiritual pig pen where we end up involved in things that we never planned to do. When we continue to have the needs of our heart met in improper ways, other than the Father's love, we end up just like the younger son in the story, in a spiritual pig pen. This is not a holiness message, but I do want to say this. When we meet the needs of our heart in improper ways, sin, it takes us farther than we plan to go. It costs us more than we plan to pay. And it keeps us longer than we plan to stay. So then how do we remedy this? We have to learn how to discern the times when we get off center from the Father's love. We do this by having people in our lives that help us start our journey home. Community. These are people in our lives that help us to discern our drift. I'm grateful there are several people in my life, but in this season, I have 2 sitting right there in the back. That in the times where my Father's love meter is a little low, they say, you had a hard day. Are you praying in the Spirit? Did you renounce their rejection? It's trying to come back. I see it creeping up on you. They help us discern our drift and to know if our Father's love meter is low. That's what it looks like to stay centered. They hold us accountable in that they can clearly identify where we are in Father's love. That's why community is important. That's why walking in intimacy and transparency with other people is important. We must learn to value God, not only just for what he can do for us, but value him for love and intimacy in his heart. What does this look like? It looks like going from a consumer attitude to a transformational attitude. So simply put, what does that prayer look like to go from a consumer attitude to a transformational attitude? It looks like praying this: Father, I'm not here to seek anything from your hand. I just want to see your face. How much of our culture actually we go to God, and I've been guilty of this. I grew up in a culture that's guilty of this. God, I don't want to see your face. I just want what you're going to give me. Give me, give me, give me. That's a consumer attitude to a transformational attitude. Father, I'm not here to seek anything from your hand. I just want to see your face. And as the Lord does, he's so good, he looks at Moses in that same moment and says, go behind that, because you asked to see my face, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to let my goodness pass you by. I want to talk about the cycle of shame for a few moments, and then we'll be finished. You're going to see this picture on the screen because I like charts and graphs. And I believe the Lord wants to heal some of us from this shame. All right? We're going to go deep for a moment. So many Christians live under the power and the burden of self-condemnation of past sins that they've committed. And in essence, they are stuck in cycles of shame. Let's continue to look at this cycle. When a believer falls into sin, or for some of us, jumps into sin, the result of that is an immediate sense of failure in our inability to measure up to God's expectations. This failure leads to shame and embarrassment. Get this, embarrassment, I was embarrassed. That's just a nice, kind word for saying shame. This failure leads to shame and embarrassment for not being perfect, and guilt for having violated God's law. Shame and guilt lead to fear of being found out, fear of rejection, and fear of God's wrath. And the natural reaction to fear is to hide. This cycle just didn't start with you. In case you're battling with shame, blame Adam and Eve. Genesis 3, 7 through 10. For the sake of time, I'm not going to read it. All right? But I do want to go over something a bit more. We have to understand that their shame and their embarrassment caused them to sew fig leaves to hide their nakedness. Today, we don't sew literal fig leaves, thank God. We do sew figurative ones, and we do sew spiritual ones. 15 years before I was born in 96, but the Lord is great. A woman by the name of Carol Thompson, in her book, The Bruises of Satan, shared deep insight. I didn't come up with this myself, but I'm going to take it like it's mine, and I'm going to preach it to the glory of God. A woman by the name of Carol Thompson shared this, what spiritual fig leaves actually are. And because I like graphs, go to the one before that. I'm going to break it down a little bit more. So when we begin to find ourselves in shame and we begin to find ourselves far from the Father's love, we begin to live as this younger son. What happens? F, fear of moving ahead in a deeper relationship with God and others. I, insecurity, the lack of a close relationship because of one's failure. G, guilt, condemnation resulting from unconfessed sins. L, loneliness. The power of shame separates us from community and genuine relationships. E, exile, seeking comfort through counterfeit affections and inferior pleasures. A, anxiety in the knowledge of knowing that you are distant from God, affecting all of life. And F, frustration, a reoccurring cycle that further distances us from the Father's love. Adam and Eve covered themselves with literal fig leaves. We cover ourselves, you can go to the next one, with spiritual fig leaves. Fear, insecurity, guilt, loneliness, exile, anxiety, and frustration. Hear me when I say this morning. Until we receive the fullness of the Father's love and learn how to live in it, we will continually get off center from his heart. And this cycle will occur over and over and over and over again. Not only does it affect us, but it affects the way that we represent the Father's love to other people, which will begin to misrepresent his heart to others. Once we stop feeling like a son and a daughter, what happens? We begin to go back to the Father and say, can I become a hired hand? Can I become a servant? And this is service that is motivated by fear and not love for the Father. Abba's heart, the message of God as our Father, lets us know that we cannot get back home in and of our own power. In and of ourselves, we do not have the power to become sons and daughters of God. But through Jesus and through everything that he died for, salvation, the salvation of our souls, but also a relationship with our Father. So what happens when we fail the most? The Father looks at us. He holds out that same white sheet we saw before. He holds out those outstretched arms. And he says, come back home. Just like he said to the younger son in the story that we're reading, regardless of the sin that we currently may be walking in, he's waiting for us to do what? Turn our faces towards home. so he can run to us and he can embrace us and he can clothe us in his righteousness. You see, in our spirit, man, yeah, you're born again, but in your mind, in your will, in your emotion, there's still some things, that sanctification process that needs to be worked out. But in those moments of soul torment, what does the Father say? He says, I love you. Now come home anyway. Can I let you in on a secret? Stale religious Christianity hates homecomings because they involve real and true emotion. But the Father loves homecomings. The Father loves redemption stories. Why? What does it look like? Because he's looking for sons and daughters, not hired hands. You can put that up. He's looking for sons and daughters, not hired hands. So maybe you're listening to me and you're in this younger son's place. And then maybe you're not. Maybe you say, I'm not far from the Father, but I don't understand the fullness of his heart and the fullness of his love. Maybe you're listening to me and the refreshing of his presence is no more. That's one of the key indicators for me when I've drifted off sin of the Father's love. I don't feel the tangible affection of his heart. I can't just sit in the room and say, Father, how much do you love me? And he comes and meets me. It's a block. Ultimately, if that is you, if you're hearing me and you say, you know what, I'm a bit far from his heart. Maybe it's not, maybe I'm not in a pig pen, but I'm still in his house, but my heart posture is, I don't understand the fullness of his heart for me. He says to us, simply come back home.